Have you ever wondered what lurks in the depths of the earth? What ancient secrets and mysteries lie buried beneath our feet? For centuries, archaeologists have been unearthing incredible finds that have shed light on our past and challenged our understanding of the world. But some of these discoveries are more than just fascinating, they're downright creepy. In this video, we're counting down the top 31 creepiest archaeological finds ever made. From a disturbing ancient labyrinth of death to a single mummified lung, these discoveries are sure to send a chill down your spine. Creepiest archaeological finds ever. Number 31. The world's first leper. An archaeological find in India revealed the remains of a 4,000-year-old skeleton belonging to a male. The skeleton itself indicates that the man had leprosy and was likely an outcast. Hindu tradition calls for cremation, whereas those seen as unfit for society were more often than not buried. The skeleton of this man was found buried in a stone enclosure that contained the ashes of burnt cow dung that was thought to be a purifying substance. Was this man patient zero for leprosy? Not at all. Recent studies of the leprosy bacilli revealed that the parasitic evolution started in early hominids millions of years ago, making leprosy perhaps the oldest human-specific infection. Number 30. The medieval man of Sligo. In 2015, a 200-year-old beech tree had blown down during a storm in Sligo Island, revealing a skeleton from medieval times. The upper half of the skeleton was found to be raised in the air with the fallen tree's roots while the legs were still in the ground. The man was thought to be between roughly 17 and 25 years old at the time of his passing, which was likely at the hand of another person. His bones revealed that his wounds had been inflicted by a sword or a knife in an extremely brutal fashion, sometime between 1030 and 1200 AD. This could have been during battle, or possibly a personal dispute with another person. The only issue with this being battle-inflicted is that there were no other bodies found nearby. So who oofed this man, and why? Number 29. The world's oldest unsolved murder. In 1991, high in the Utstal Alps between Austria and Italy, hikers stumbled upon a well-preserved mummy which sent shockwaves throughout the world of archaeology. This mummified man emerged from the ice, perfectly preserved for over 5,000 years. The man, who is thought to have been between 25 to 37 years old, is often referred to as Otzi the Iceman. Initially, scientists believed that the 5'3" Otzi had met his demise due to exposure or an accident. He was found to have whipworm, and it was revealed that he had suffered from arthritis. Neither had contributed to his death though. In 2001, however, during an autopsy, a scientist studying Otzi unearthed a flint arrowhead lodged in his shoulder, revealing that it was not nature or a simple fall. He was murdered. This revelation made Otzi's tale even more captivating, making it the world's oldest unsolved murder mystery. Who wanted Otzi gone and why? The answer remains forever lost in time. Number 28. The Knife-Armed Man. In 2018, archaeologists in northern Italy found a 1,500-year-old body of an ancient Italian man who died with a knife in his hand. Only upon closer inspection did they realize that he didn't die with a knife in his hand. Rather, the knife was his hand. It turns out the mysterious gentleman lost his right hand to perhaps a mighty sword blow when he was a young man. Miraculously, he survived, the wound healed, and he got the bright idea to turn himself into a walking warrior, using leather to tightly bind a long metal knife to his forearm. So for decades, the man walked amongst his kin and neighbors with a knife arm, or perhaps an armed spear, until his death around the age of 50. One might speculate that he never had any problems carving up his steaks at dinner time or poking potential enemies. Either way, he left us a seriously cool yet slightly disturbing corpse. Number 27. The Atacama Alien. She's got the look of an alien, a misshapen coned head with a small angular jaw and a giant cranium, and it stands only 6 inches tall. In fact, she looks just like sketches of aliens in modern folklore. But unlike the claims that they say she's an alien, she's actually a human tragedy. Likely stillborn, her body had multiple genetic mutations that made survival impossible, including having only 10 sets of ribs instead of 12, and her bones showed signs of having aged prematurely. Ata, as she's often referred to as, was found in an Atacama desert ghost town in Chile in 2003, wrapped up in a white cloth and tied with a violet ribbon. DNA tests indicate that she likely died about 40 years earlier, in the 1960s. Scientists are now attempting to use the poor girl's DNA to better understand mutations so they can help those with similar conditions in modern society. Number 26. Shackled skeletons of Phaleron. It's gruesome, not just skeletons, but shackled skeletons murdered while bound. Archaeologists recently found the mass grave in Phaleron, an ancient port city about 4 miles from Athens, Greece. The death pit contains 80 skeletons, 36 of them bound with iron shackles, dating to about 630 BC. That is right around the time of an attempted coup in Athens by a famous winner of the 640 BC Olympics. His name was Cylon, and he'd become famous, married a tyrant's daughter in a nearby Megara, and well, became a bit full of himself. So he gathered an army of rebels in 632 BC when Athens was going through some troubled political times and invaded the famous city, hoping that many of the citizens would join him in the coup. When they didn't, he fled to the Acropolis for safety, but he and his men were hunted down and mercilessly slaughtered. Archaeologists think the shackled skeletons are part of Cylon's army of rebels, and perhaps Cylon himself is one of them. Number 25. The disturbing Civil War massacre. Before renovations and expansion upon the library at Durham University in England in 2013, archaeologists excavating the area before construction stumbled upon quite the disturbing sight. What they had just discovered were 2 mass graves that held 1,700 skeletons from the mid-17th century. All of the skeletal remains were men between the ages of 13 and 25, and are thought to have belonged to Scottish prisoners that were captured during the Third English Civil War, which saw royalists of King Charles II clash with Oliver Cromwell's parliamentarians. The Battle of Dunbar, the battle in which these soon-to-be prisoners were thought to have taken part in, was one of the bloodiest battles of the 17th century, and one that was short-lived, with Cromwell defeating the royalists in less than an hour. The bodies of these prisoners showed little to no signs of blunt force trauma, leading researchers to believe they all died of disease or starvation during their imprisonment, where they were later carelessly discarded into mass graves. Number 24. Ancient chemical warfare. In present-day Syria, in 2009, archaeologists were excavating an ancient Roman city known as Dura Europos. While this was a pretty fascinating dig, the archaeologists discovered something disturbing: the skeletal remains of 20 Romans that had fled into mine shafts before their deaths. These people are thought to have died during the siege of Dura Europos in 256 AD at the hands of Persian attackers. But rather than being slain by spears or swords, they were viciously killed by a deadly cloud of sulfur dioxide. The smart Persian soldiers had strategically placed fire pits all throughout the tunnels, so that when the Romans entered, all the Persians had to do was add sulfur crystals and bitumen to the fire, and watch the horrific deaths that ensued. Number 23. Unknown prehistoric war. In 2012, the over 10,000-year-old bones of 27 men, women, and children were discovered in the deposits of Lake Turkana in Kenya. All of their skeletal remains showed signs of trauma, bearing marks from club and spear-like weapons. Researchers believe that rather than this being a violent dispute, their demise was the result of ancient warfare, with the women and children of the losing side being brutally slaughtered in the aftermath. One of the female skeletons indicated that both of her knees were broken and her hands were extended, leading researchers to believe that she was bound together and brutally tortured. One of the men also had a bladelet of obsidian volcanic rock embedded in his skull. This absolutely gruesome massacre site Nataruk is one of the oldest pieces of evidence of ancient warfare and challenges our beliefs of prehistoric conflict. Unlike most ancient wars, this group consisted of hunter-gatherers instead of an early settlement that possessed land and power. It remains a mystery as to what exactly prompted this brutal massacre. Number 22. France's Pit of Death. In 2012, a property development project in France discovered an absolutely horrific ancient site, a 6.5-foot deep pit full to the top with human bones. The bones are between 5,500 to 6,500 years old and were made up of arms and fingers of both adults, children, and even babies. While this does seem like it would be the work of some sadistic Neolithic serial killer, archaeologists believe it to be a sign of ancient warfare due to the appearance of what seems to be axe marks on some of the bones. One of the most bizarre aspects of this site is the apparent collection of severed arms that were found in the pit that may have been trophies. Such examples of this kind of trophy hunting are unheard of during this time period and region, leaving us with the question as to who exactly these ancient butchers were. Number 21. The mummified lung. Imagine, if you will, finding a sarcophagus with a skeleton and nothing but one lone mummified lung. This is what happened to archaeologists in 1959 at the Basilica of St. Denis in Paris. This was no Egyptian pharaoh, but the body of Frankish Queen Aragond, who was the first known queen of Francia around 558 AD. Analysis of her body revealed that she had a baby when she was roughly 18, but that still doesn't reveal why only one of her lungs was preserved. It wasn't until 2016 that researchers thoroughly conducted tests on the lung, only to find chemical traces of various plant compounds, particularly that of a high amount of copper. This led the researchers to conclude that when herbal embalming fluid was poured down her throat after her passing, it landed in her lung. Since she was also wearing a copper belt, the antimicrobial properties of the copper reacted to the embalming fluids in a way that was able to preserve her lung. While initially creepy, this is now just nothing but coincidence. Number 20. Teeth embedded in Roman woman's leg? Spanish archaeologists revealed a 1,600-year Roman woman who passed away in her 30s during the decline of the Roman Empire. Her passing was not by the hands of barbarians, though. When further studying her body, archaeologists were stunned to find a ball of bone in her pelvis that contained 4 malformed teeth. Was she tortured with some bizarre tooth contraption in her pelvic region? As insane as that sounds, no, not at all. The teeth are actually a part of something rare known as an ovarian teratoma, which is a tumor that develops from germ cells. They serve as the precursors of human egg cells, which enable them to help with the formation of certain body parts, such as bones and teeth. But despite there being a scientific explanation behind this phenomenon, this would still be pretty creepy to the one to come across this discovery. Number 19. Ancient sacrifice celebrities? Archaeologists in present-day Syria discovered countless bones that belong to both humans and animals, dating back to 2300 BC Assyria. Of the human bones, 3 of them were found to be headless and laying next to each other. The archaeologists speculated that at least one of the people was an acrobat due to the skeleton's unusual ligaments and bones, as well as some of the apparent injuries the person seemed to possess. These details of the skeleton are congruent with those of a modern acrobat or ballet dancer. This led the team to conclude that the monumental building in which the humans and animals were found in were there for sacrifice, and that the humans just may have had to be of a certain star status in order to be a good enough offering to the gods. What better person is there to sacrifice to the gods than a well-known local acrobat? Number 18. Neanderthal cannibals. Archaeologists in the caves of Goyet in Belgium found that Neanderthals and cannibals didn't just feast on reindeer and horses, but also each other. This startling revelation came when they discovered the bones of 4 teenagers and a child who lived roughly 40,000 years ago. The bones showed signs of cutting and fractures that were to extract the marrow from within. The signs heavily indicate that they were cut up the same way horses and reindeer were, with the intention to disarticulate and remove flesh. Whether or not this was out of necessity for food, there are many indications that some Neanderthals ate their own dead. There has also been growing speculation over the years that cannibalism was more common amongst Neanderthals due to the signs left behind not only in Belgium, but also Spain and France. We could call this systemic, a practice that was solely for food, or even something that was symbolic but that we do not know. Number 17. The hanging coffins of Sagada. There are a series of coffins that are suspended from cliffs in the Sagada Mountains of the Philippines. The custom of hanging coffins in this region dates back over 2,000 years, but the exact reason why this practice was followed remains an absolute mystery. Some people believe that the coffins were hung so that the dead could be closer to the heavens. Others believe that it was a way to protect the bodies from predators. Most maintain the belief that it was a way to show respect for the dead. The first Westerner to see the hanging coffins of Sagada was an American missionary named William Henry Scott in the early 1900s. The mysterious reason as to why the coffins were hung and the identity of the people buried in them are still unknown, adding to the creepiness of the hanging coffins of Sagada. Visitors to the site often report feeling a sense of unease or even fear. Some people have even claimed to have heard strange noises. Number 16. The mystery of the Roanoke Colony. The Roanoke Colony, also known as the Lost Colony, is one of the biggest mysteries in American colonial history. It all started in 1587. A group of 115 English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island in what is now North Carolina. These settlers were the first English colonists to attempt to establish a permanent settlement in America. However, when Governor John White returned to the colony 3 years later, he found it completely deserted. The only clues to the colonists' fate were the words Crow and Croatoan carved into a tree. Historians have proposed many theories about what happened to the colonists. Some believe that they were massacred by Native Americans, while others think that they died of disease or starvation. It's also possible that they assimilated into a nearby Native American tribe. Despite centuries of searching, no definitive evidence has ever been found to explain the colonists' disappearance, making the Roanoke colony one of the creepiest mysteries in American history. Number 15. Six-Headed Chief. In 1997, an eerie grave was discovered in a church of a Scottish fishing village. The grave itself contained a full skeleton and 6 skulls. It turns out that the main skeleton was that of a tribal chief that was killed by a mighty slash across his face. 4 of the other heads belonged to family members who may have died later in feuds between the rival Scottish clans of the Mackays and the Rosses. In a peculiar twist, the last head belonged to a monk who died 500 years before and had been possibly, in quite the disturbing manner, kept as a prized family relic. Archaeologists say that the burial of heads together was almost unheard of in medieval Scotland, so this tale of the six-headed chief had them quite baffled. Number 14. Sandbyborg Massacre. When archaeologists first started digging into a stone-ringed fortress at Sandbyborg on the southwest Swedish island of Öland, they found lots of wonderful jewelry, such as silver brooches, finger rings, beads, and bells. It was a shiny start to the excavation, but it soon turned into a horrifying sight. Lots of skeletons were unearthed, all showing signs of not just murder, but some sort of assassination, with slashes to the back of skulls and no defensive wounds on the front bones. It was like the victims had simply resigned themselves to death or perhaps had been tied up to be butchered. While there were no females among the dead, it appears as if there were males of all ages there and even tragically young boys. The archaeologists have many years of excavation left at the 1600-year-old site, but don't expect finding any females among the dead. It can only be surmised what came of those women and girls, but considering that the marauders were most likely men, it shouldn't be too hard to guess. Number 13. The Sacrificial Pit of Shimao. This terrifying discovery is evidence of human sacrifice in early Chinese civilization. Local villagers have known about the pits of Shimao, but figured they were unfinished remains of the Great Wall of China. As this area was on the border of the Chinese Empire and nomadic peoples, archaeologists discovered that it was in fact not a part of the wall, but rather a long-lost city of over 4,000 years old. When excavating the ancient site, they found paintings of monsters and half-human beasts, as well as 6 pits filled with over 80 human skulls. The skeletal remains showed signs of decapitations, burnings, and brutal beatings. Experts believe the skeletal remains all belonged to princesses and a noble woman of enemy groups. Above the horrifying pits were statues and monuments with creepy designs that looked like watching eyes. This scale of the ritual massacre is found almost nowhere else in ancient Chinese society, and many believe this ritual was a show of power amongst other enemy groups. Number 12. Franklin's Lost Expedition. In 2015, a Canadian Coast Guard ship and underwater archaeologists found the wreck of the long-lost Franklin expedition. In 1814, under Sir John Franklin's direction, 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, left England for an expedition. Franklin sought to investigate the Northwest Passage via crossing the Canadian Arctic. The 2 ships, which had 129 crew members on board, were soon entrapped in the ice and disappeared without a single trace. Modern researchers found that the sailors on board endured appalling conditions and started passing away from a variety of ailments, including lead poisoning and hypothermia. The surviving crew members went out to try and find the nearest trading post, but none of them were ever heard from again. The creepiest find of Franklin's lost expedition is that among the wreckage, there were strong indications that the sailors ran out of food and turned to cannibalism. Countless bones showed signs of being hacked up and boiled. Some were even cracked, so survivors could get the marrow inside the bones of their fellow crewmen. Number 11. Mummified Island. Drowning after your ship has struck a barrier reef is not the worst way to die. You could be tortured, raped, and then killed. All of this is exactly what happened to many of the survivors of a 1629 shipwreck 40 kilometers off the west coast of Australia, on the tiny Beacon Island, now deemed Murder Island. And no, they weren't murdered by natives. They were brutally slaughtered by the mutineers that had been on board the Dutch ship Batavia with them. Archaeologists call it the first mass murder in Australian history, and a sort of the Lord of the Flies scenario, where survival and isolation in a small group leads to dirty and deathly deeds. Over a 3-month period, 125 people were ruthlessly murdered, though the women were evidently kept alive long enough to be raped and tortured. Nearly 400 years later, archaeologists are still finding the remains of the victims. Number 10. Screaming Mummy. In 1886, French archaeologist Gaston Maspero discovered an Egyptian mummy that was covered in sheepskin, a material that had often been considered unclean by ancient Egyptians. While that doesn't sound all that bad, the screaming, disfigured face of the mummy says otherwise. The man's face, which is crying out in horror, was thought to likely be from gruesome torture. Both the feet and hands of his body were bound together, and archaeologists initially thought that he may have even been poisoned and/or buried alive. But all of these theories came to a swift end when taking into account that his jaw was not strapped shut. When such a burial method isn't carried out, the human jaw naturally falls open during the process of decay, making the body appear as if it is screaming. Since this discovery, several more mummies from all over the world have been found and also appeared to be screaming. So, if you ever encounter a mummy without a strapped jaw, then you might be in for quite the jaw-dropper. Number 9. Witch Prison. What happened in 1597 Aberdeen, Scotland probably puts America's Salem witch trials to shame. 24 so-called witches were slathered in hot tar and set afire in one of the darkest chapters of European Christianity. But before the untimely murder of the 23 women and 1 man, they were shackled and kept in the witch prison in the Kirk of St. Nicholas. It was the dead of winter as they awaited their punishment by community elders in Aberdeen's Great Witch Hunt of 1597, and it was just one phase of a great wave of persecutions across what is now Great Britain after King James pronounced his witchcraft laws. It is said that some of the poor victims at witch prison were given a token of mercy by the elders, being allowed to be strangled before their bodies were set upon the burning pyres. Number 8. Polish Vampire Burials. In the dark forests of Poland, archaeologists have unearthed a chilling sight: the remains of vampire burials dating back to the 17th and 18th centuries, which contain the bodies of people who were believed to have risen from the dead to drink the blood of the living. To prevent these so-called vampires from terrorizing their communities, they buried the bodies face down, decapitated them, placed stakes through their hearts, and even placed rocks in their mouths to prevent them from biting. One particularly gruesome burial was discovered in the village of Pienne. The body of a woman was found face down with a padlock on her ankle. Her head was severed and placed between her legs. Another burial in the village of Drosko contained the remains of a man with a sickle placed across his neck, with the sickle intended to decapitate him if he tried to rise from the dead. What caused this deep-seated fear of vampires that were thought to have existed in Poland for centuries is unknown, but these deaths are for sure quite creepy. Number 7. Human food. Within the depths of the ancient Mesoamerican city of Teotihuacan, archaeologists unearthed a chilling discovery: a den where vicious predators were kept, waiting to be sacrificed to the gods. But the bones scattered among the animal remains told a more sinister tale. Maize pollen found on the predators' bones revealed their diet: human flesh. The walls of the den were adorned with gruesome artwork depicting the animals feasting on human hearts. The priests of Teotihuacan dragged their victims into this macabre chamber, where they were devoured by the ravenous beasts alive. Whether as punishment or ritual, these unfortunate souls met a gruesome fate. Imagine the terror of being thrown into a den of pumas, knowing that your flesh would soon be torn apart. The priest's cruelty was boundless, and the den of predators stands as a testament to their dark rituals. Number 6. The Mummy Voice. While not necessarily an archaeological find, what researchers did to a mummy that was discovered is pretty unsettling. Using 3D printing, scientists were able to recreate the vocal cords of this mummy, which was that of a highly regarded Egyptian priest by the name Nesyamun. The voice sounded like so. Yeah, go ahead and roast me and tell me this isn't scary. But personally for me, this is downright terrifying. David Howard, someone involved in the project, said, "There is nothing more personal than someone's voice. So we think hearing a voice from so long ago will be an unforgettable experience, making heritage places come alive." Some argue that in a way, this is bringing someone back from the dead to an extent. Nesyamun may not have been scary while he was alive, but if anything, the only thing creepy here is technology itself. Number 5. Ancient underground labyrinth of death. In 2018, all-terrain robots explored a 3,000-year-old Peruvian temple known as Chavandayhuanta, where they discovered 36 underground passages. In these passages, the remains of 3 intact bodies were found, all of which were thought to have been sacrificed in rituals that involved drugs, noise, and light manipulation. Researchers deemed the bodies to be lower class due to the circumstances they were found, which was buried face down in shallow pits and in basic clothes. The tombs also contained precious metals, vibrant textiles, countless other historical artifacts such as pottery, scrolls, and several animal carvings on the wall. Was this some sort of sick, sadistic Saw or Squid Games type of torture for contemporary elites to get off to? Not at all. It was much more of a ritualistic and extremely sacred site. Yet, a disturbing one at that. Number 4. Frozen child sacrifice mummies. In 1999, archaeologists discovered the perfectly preserved mummies of 3 Inca children on the summit of Uyayaco, a volcano in the Andes Mountains. The children, known as the Children of Uyayaco, were sacrificed in a religious ritual around the year 1500 AD. These mummies are incredibly well preserved due to the cold, dry conditions on the mountaintop, which left their skin, hair, and clothing all intact, and they even still had their eyelashes and fingernails. The Children of Uyayaco are creepy for a number of reasons, one being that they were so young, with the oldest child being a 15-year-old girl and the 2 other children being a 7-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. Most horrifyingly, though, was the manner in which they passed. Research shows that the children were drugged with coca and alcohol and then placed in a small chamber underground. The children were also buried with a number of ritual objects, including food, drinks, and clothing. None of this, though, could save them from their unsettling deaths caused by hypothermia. Number 3. The Aztec Skull Tower. There is a 15th century nightmare monument that consists of nearly 120 human skulls and is over 16 feet in diameter. It is found in Mexico and is believed to be one of 7 such towers that stood in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Experts believe this monument was given to the war god Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the god of rain. Some of the skulls found within the tower have even been proven to belong to women and children. Archaeologists believe that prisoners and enemy warriors were killed sacrificially, and their remains were used to make the skull tower. The Aztecs believed that building these monuments was a way to keep the gods happy and to prevent them from destroying their civilization. They supposedly used lime and other bones to fuse the remains together to create what we now know as this absolutely unsettling skull tower. Number 2. Ashkelon's unwanted babies. In 1988, archaeologists discovered a mass baby grave that contained the bones of over 100 babies beneath a base house in Israel. All skeletons were intact, leading researchers to believe that the infants had been thrown into a gutter at the bottom of a sewer, with most showing signs of not even being more than 3 days old. There were no signs to indicate illness, and all the infants seemed to be perfectly healthy. It is thought that these babies were born to prostitutes or laborers who worked at the bathhouse, but this only remains purely a speculation. While it was initially believed that the infant bodies were those of females due to widespread female infanticide being common in the Roman Empire, this was not the case. All the babies, most of which turned out to be males, may have been rejected for an even more disturbing reason, because they would have no value being raised to one day work the brothel. Number 1. The Scottish Frankenstein mummy. In 2001, 2 3,000-year-old skeletons were found at Cladhallan, a Bronze Age settlement on a Scottish island. One skeleton was a male, while the other was female, and testing indicated that both were preserved in bogs to prevent decomposing. Later testing ended up revealing that the 2 bodies belonged to several different people. One alleged male skeleton consisted of body parts from 3 different men, while the other female skeleton also comprised of 3 different people. What's even more bizarre about this is that testing on the skull of the so-called female body revealed the skull to be 50 to 200 years older than its torso. While this disturbing human centipede-like find may be unsettling to us in modern times, it is likely that they were the equivalent of ancient legal documents for land rights through ancestral claim, which essentially, and most literally, combines families into a single line of descent. Thank you for watching a very spooky episode of Amateur Archaeology. If you are scared or even downright terrified, please like this episode and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, we'll see you next time, only on Amateur Archaeology.